This may appear to be an empty farm field, but what's visible on the surface doesn't always reveal what is below. Archaeological excavation here has revealed that this was the site of a lively village some several hundred years ago. The archaeologists who discovered it named it the Noble-Wieting site. Noble-Wieting is located in McLean County, Illinois, near Kickapoo Creek. Based on diagnostic artifacts found at the site, archaeologists have identified these people as part of the Langford tradition. These ancestral Native American people lived complex and interesting lives, the material evidence for which has been left beneath the ground surface. In the summers of 2017 and 2018, Illinois State University's Archaeological Field School brought up students to the site to investigate it. The Langford tradition, or simply Langford, is a term archaeologists use to describe a group of Native American people living in Illinois around 1200 through 1500 current era. Langford people sites are mostly concentrated in the upper Illinois River Valley, much of which is now the greater Chicago region. Archaeologists define Langford by the shared styles of material culture that they left behind, which include pottery, stone tools, foodways, architecture, and more. Langford is merely a term modern people have given them. These Native American peoples certainly called themselves by a different name, or may have even identified as several different groups and gone by several different names. Langford was not the only group in Illinois around during this time. The Mississippians were the most influential group around during this period. Their biggest site, a prehistoric city called Cahokia, can be found in Illinois directly across the Mississippi River from modern-day St. Louis. Some estimates say as many as 8,000 people lived in the Cahokia area. Mississippians were a religiously and politically powerful group who established many large centers across the American Midwest and Southeast. The Langford and Mississippians had many shared cultural practices. Both groups relied on maize agriculture for most of their food, used pottery to cook their meals, hunted with the bow and arrow, and so on. Their material culture is different enough for archaeologists to distinguish between the two groups as separate cultures. However, there is evidence for these two groups interacting, which is why Noble-Wieting is a very fascinating place for archaeologists to study. The excavations that are part of the Illinois State University Field School were not the first archaeological investigations into the site. During the 1960s and 70s, there were several excavations. During the 2017 and 2018 excavations, efforts were concentrated on a house in the northwest portion of the site, as well as some of the area around it. By doing these excavations, the goal was to better understand the lives of the people who lived at Noble-Wieting, as well as the lives of other people who lived during this period. The Noble-Wieting site is located between the known borders of Langford and Mississippian settlements, and understanding the people at the site may better reveal how the two groups of people interacted. As this map shows, Langford sites tend to occur in the northeastern part of the state, while Mississippian sites occur in the west-central portion, primarily close to the Illinois and Mississippi rivers. Noble-Wieting, designated here by its formal name, 11 ML24, is in a space between these two areas. Because Noble-Wieting is in a unique position and in a place of interaction between the two groups, it is a valuable place of study. While conducting research is an important reason to excavate here, the field school serves another purpose: to educate students. Students who are interested in the field of archaeology can take the field school to learn practical field methodology. These field techniques include excavation, how to take field notes, record other archaeological data, and much more. Excavation is not the only tool archaeologists have to look beneath the earth. When trying to understand large portions of a site, excavation can prove to be too expensive and destructive to the cultural resources. Remote sensing is a great, non-invasive way archaeologists can understand archaeological sites. One remote sensing technique you may be familiar with is ground-penetrating radar, which uses radar waves to map the subsoil. A common remote sensing technique that archaeologists use is called magnetometry. Magnetometry detects slight electromagnetic changes in the soil to map out what's below the surface. When soil is dug up, subject to sunlight, or is burned, it will have a different electromagnetic signature than the undisturbed soil. This allows magnetometry to see pits people have dug, where their fires were, and where the foundations of their architecture was, all below the ground surface. At Noble-Wieting, the Illinois State Archaeological Survey came out and mapped the site using a magnetometer to produce this image. This image may look like a bunch of blobs, but it has a lot of information a trained archaeologist can interpret. Imagine this as an aerial view of the site. All of the black and white areas are places with magnetic signatures, with the black and white correlating to magnetic poles, while the gray covering most of the image is undisturbed soil. Most of the features on this image are small dots, which could be post holes, although most are likely pits that were used for storing food or disposing of trash. The larger rectangular stains are likely the outlines of buildings, whose wooden timbers have long since rotted. A trained professional was able to produce this map based on the magnetometry data. All of the rectangular boxes are where the archaeologist interprets there to be probable Langford buildings and houses. The dark blobs are interpreted as posts and pits. As this map shows, the structures are organized surrounding an area that is mostly empty. This area is called a plaza and would have been the site of many community activities including games and ceremonies. The solid rectangle in the upper left is the house foundation that was the focus of the 2017 and 2018 Illinois State University excavations. Before shovels can hit the dirt, there's much field preparation that must take place first. Archaeologists must carefully record the position of where they dig and what they find, so that they can reconstruct what the site was like. This allows future archaeologists to know what parts of the site have been excavated. To do this at Noble-Wieting, a machine called a total station was used to place with pinpoint accuracy what is called a datum. A datum is a metal spike inserted into the ground which serves as a known set of coordinates from which the position of everything at the site is recorded in relation to. This allowed the archaeological investigators to mark out both where the students had dug in 2017 and where they would dig in the 2018 field season. The students' efforts uncovered the house basin, which is once the ground surface of the house. It is enclosed by several trenches. These serve to anchor the wall posts in place. The current evidence at the house indicates it was made from what is called a wall trench style of architecture. Different colored soils allow the excavators to see where the ancient people dug to put in their house posts. The soil Langford people dug into at the site tends to be a lighter color and fairly sterile. The soil that filled in the holes after the posts rotted is full of organic matter and darker in color. The vertical posts would have been laid out on the ground and been connected with the horizontal supports to form a whole section of the wall. This section of the wall was then lowered into the wall trench, hence the name wall trench architecture. The vertical posts, made of stout but flexible saplings, would have been bent across the center of the building and tied together to form a curved roof. The walls of the structure were possibly formed with a wattle and daub style of architecture. Wattle refers to branches woven back and forth between the wall posts, almost like a basket. Daub is clay mixed with plant fibers, which is used to fill in the gaps in the wattle and form a solid, windproof wall. Working at the site, lots of burnt clay was found in the house basin, which may be what is left of the daub. The ceiling of the building was likely thatched with grass to waterproof the structure and form insulation. This reconstruction may be what a similar house looked like. In the center, numerous shallow pits were found with signs of burning, which suggests that these served as fire basins to cook food and warm the house. Pottery was one of the first kinds of artifacts uncovered when excavating the house basin. Pottery at archaeological sites is rarely whole or near complete, and the Noble-Wieting site is no exception. Most of the ceramics at the site are sherds the size of a quarter or smaller. Objects in the archaeological record are often at the stage in their lives when people decided to throw them away. When it comes to pottery, the most common reason for prehistoric people discarding it is because it was broken, which would have been a regular occurrence. To recover small objects like these pottery sherds, archaeologists will sift all the dirt through a screen, which catches many more artifacts that can be spotted with the naked eye. Langford pottery tends to be simple and globular shaped, like these Mississippian pots. Occasionally, there's some more complicated pottery styles that have been found, like pots with handles, and even rarer, ceramic items like dishes. The outside surface of pots was sometimes left plain or decorated in several different styles, including this cord-mark pottery. Ceramics made entirely from natural clay are prone to cracking when being fired, which is the heating process which turns clay into ceramic. In order to avoid having the pots break before they could be used, people would use a temper. Temper, unlike clay, does not expand much while undergoing the intense heat of the firing process. By adding a temper to the clay, it becomes stronger and less likely to break during firing. Langford pottery has a grit temper, which consists of crushed up rock, while Mississippians use crushed pieces of shell to temper their ceramics, which is called a shell temper. Langford peoples used stone tools for cutting, chopping, drilling, or most activities requiring a sharp edge. Flint knapping produced most of these tools, which is the practice of reducing flint and chert into stone tools. Flakes are the simplest stone tool to produce and are the result of producing other kinds of tools. Flakes that are the byproduct of creating other tools are called debitage and are extremely common at Noble-Wieting. Debitage flakes are some of the first artifacts found while excavating the house basin. Arrowheads for hunting are fairly common tools found at the site. These are made from pieces of flint shaped into simple triangles, a style called Madison points. Drills and knife blades are also found at the site. An important stone tool that wasn't created through flint knapping are axe heads, also called celts. Celts are made by a process called pecking and grinding. The ISU students found several of these celts while excavating the house basin. The people at Noble-Wieting would have needed axes for building their houses, clearing farmland, and much more. Langford peoples also used animal bone for making tools. Bone was shaped into awls and needles, which would have been important for making clothing out of leather. Fishhooks were also an important item made from bone. Langford peoples grew maize, which is another word for corn, for the majority of their diet. Beans were another important crop, which were actually found during the 2018 excavation at Noble-Wieting. While plants like beans would normally rot away long before archaeologists would uncover them, if they are charred like the ones found at Noble-Wieting, they can survive for hundreds of years. The excavations covered plenty of bones as well, which tell archaeologists what animals people at the site were eating. Students working at the site often found these bones concentrated in trash pits, where the people of Noble-Wieting threw them away. Analysis of the bones tells us that they were eating elk, white-tailed deer, small animals like beaver and rodents, and birds such as turkeys and ducks. People at Noble-Wieting also utilized the marine animals that could be found in the nearby Kickapoo Creek, which include fish, turtles, and shellfish. The large animals would have been hunted with the bow and arrow. Small animals could have been caught in traps, and fish could have been caught using nets or with hooks made from bone. The population of Noble-Wieting would have had several divisions in social structure. Based on burial goods and historic accounts of Native Americans, there was likely a gendered division of labor. For example, men would have been responsible for hunting and making hunting implements, while women were the ones making pottery and doing most of the cooking. Archaeologists are still trying to understand how their society functioned in terms of other social divisions. We know that at large Mississippian sites, like Cahokia, powerful leaders enjoyed positions in society that afforded them preferential treatment and excluded them from menial tasks. While sites like Noble-Wieting likely had village leaders with special responsibilities, Langford society was still fairly egalitarian, which is another way of saying that people, including their leaders, lived fairly equal lives. Further research is needed to understand the social structure of Langford society and at Noble-Wieting specifically. The bows and arrows that Langford people had weren't just for hunting animals. Warfare had become prominent by this period of North American prehistory. People had populated the landscape enough to cause conflict over space, and the intensification of agriculture meant that there were spare crops, an enticing surplus that people could attempt to steal. Many villages during this period had a palisade, which is a defensive wall surrounding the houses. Archaeologists can find evidence of post holes surrounding a village, suggesting a palisade, much like how they find post holes for buildings. Most palisades would have been fairly simple and just encircled the village that they protected. The Mississippian people at Cahokia had a palisade that would have been miles long. They even had defensive towers, called bastions, built into strategic points of the palisade for the defending archers to fire down onto any attackers. At Noble-Wieting, some post holes have been found which could be evidence for a palisade, although future work at the site is needed to determine whether or not one existed. Warfare was not the only interactions people during this era would have had with other groups. In fact, peaceful interactions probably far outnumbered violent ones. From the evidence so far, the houses at Noble-Wieting seem to be a combination of Langford and Mississippian architectural styles, suggesting a sharing of these ideas. Remember how Langford and Mississippian people used different kinds of timber for making pottery? While Noble-Wieting, a Langford site, mostly has grit-tempered pottery, a significant amount is made with shell temper. Some of the pottery that is grit-tempered has even been covered with a layer of shell-tempered clay before being fired, meaning whoever made it wanted it to look like shell-tempered pottery. This mix in pottery styles suggests that Langford people were peacefully exchanging cultural ideas with their Mississippian neighbors to the south. This mixing of pottery-making techniques is one of the principal pieces of evidence suggesting a peaceful interaction at Noble-Wieting between Langford and Mississippian peoples. So what happened to the people at Noble-Wieting? Archaeologists don't know for sure. It is very difficult to link prehistoric people at an archaeological site to historic Native American tribes. For a multitude of reasons, people in prehistory moved around and migrated, so their descendants may have moved to a different region. However, it is likely that the descendants of people at Noble-Wieting were the Native American people who lived in that area at the time of European contact. The Illinois, or Illinois tribe of Native Americans, lived in the central Mississippi River Valley, which includes most of present-day Illinois. Further to the north, the Miami Nation lived to the south and west of Lake Michigan. It is likely that the descendants of people at Noble-Wieting were incorporated into one or both of these groups. Excavations at Noble-Wieting so far have made many interesting discoveries. We know that the site served as a place where people from two different cultures, the Langford tradition and the Mississippians, interacted peacefully. Elements from each culture permeated into the daily lives of people at Noble-Wieting, such as their pottery and architecture. Students participating in the Illinois State University Field School played a large role in making this happen. Future excavations can help us better understand what life was like for the people at Noble-Wieting. Who knows what future discoveries will happen here?